Sometimes I would like to make something different than a talk, but it's not going to happen tonight. Might be disappointing, or might be a good idea that it's not going to happen. I sometimes have the idea that I would like to, instead of a talk, kind of just read some quotation to a certain topic and play some music and give some kind of, just kind of atmosphere, let's say, about a certain topic. But as I said, it hasn't happened yet. It would be quite a lot of work for me. That might be one kind of, I'm not so technically good with having to put together the music and all that, but who knows, maybe one time. So, nevertheless, this talk, or actually the title of this talk, I got inspired quite some time ago when I read about Leonard Cohen, as maybe everybody of you know who he was. Wonderful singer-songwriter, also a practitioner in the Zen tradition. And in one of his lines it says, a manual for dealing with defeats. A manual for dealing with defeats. Eine Anleitung für den Umgang mit Niederlagen. Or maybe defeats is a bit hard, too much of a word, that was his title. Maybe it's just a manual for dealing with failures. And of course I don't know exactly what he meant with that, but when I read this, I thought that, well, that's really in a way also an aspect what we are doing in our practice, kind of dealing with failures in ways that we cannot fix life for good, according to our wishes. Of course, we can fix it sometimes, but not really for good. How we define happiness in our society depends on the degree of our success to avoid difficulties, defeats, unpleasantness, and pain, and how we achieve success, pleasure, joy. We are encouraged to seek the benefits of security, certainty, and control, and we are told that these are the means to protect ourselves from injuries and the unpredictable in our lives. But in this practice, the opposite approach is taught, that there is a wisdom within us that teaches us to interpret the transient, the changing nature of all things, the unpredictable, not as our own failure, but as what it is, the way life is created. We are encouraged not to look for the protectorates of control, but rather to find protection within our own wisdom, our inner spaciousness, our inner goodness. As we enter the path of inquiry, we are all confronted with the power of our own conditioning, as we all know, how we view our life, our desire for control, our attempts to manipulate. And we are asked to examine our assumptions, values, conclusions in the light of awareness. Where do we really find happiness? Where do we find peace? Where and how does sorrow arise? What leads to conflict, fear, and limitation? And what leads to openness, compassion, inner liberation? The Buddha was not interested in philosophy. He lived his own suffering, saw it in others, and experienced the end of self-created suffering after intensive inner research of his heart and mind. And this was really his interest. There is this quite famous parable of the poison arrow that probably some of you might know, that I would like to read here. A man came to the Buddha and wanted to have all his philosophical questions answered before he would begin practicing. The Buddha replied, "It is as if a man with a poisoned arrow stuck inside said to the doctor, 'I will not allow you to remove that poisoned arrow until I know the caste, age, profession, birthplace and motive of the person who wounded me.' This man would die before he had known all this. The same would happen to anyone who would say, 'I will not practice the teachings until the Buddha has explained all the many truths of the world to me.' He would die before the Buddha could have explained all this to him." And of course, we have many questions, but the teaching, the practice does not really deal with theoretical, philosophical questions. Rather, it is about something quite pragmatic, very immediate. Yes, this is a poisoned arrow, and it must be removed because it hurts. It is now 44 years since I participated in my very first retreat. It was actually in Hapken, which is the next village from here, with Ajahn Sumedho, who was leading the retreat. And what moved me to get involved in this adventure was my relationship at that time, which was very difficult, and I was looking for some help. So it was a difficult situation at the beginning of my search. It may have been or is some difficulty that brought you to this kind of practice, or maybe it wasn't or isn't a difficulty, maybe curiosity, a basic interest in life, in a heart-mind training, or any other reasons. Now for me, what touched me a lot in this very first retreat with Ajahn Sumedho, who taught the retreat, was something that he addressed quite at the beginning of the retreat. Something like, it's not his exact words, but something like life is full of shortcomings, of inadequacies. There are sorrowful experiences. Now for me, this acknowledgement was not a pessimistic view on the world or on my life. On the contrary, after a time of great self-reproaches and accusation to my partner and to myself, it was, first of all, a great consolation, a deep inner relaxation. Actually, it still touches me when I think of it. Why was it, or why did it bring this inner relaxation? Because the acknowledgement of this fact, there are sorrowful experiences. And he didn't say there are only sorrowful experiences, but it was definitely the experience I was very much in at that moment. The acknowledgement of this fact is the beginning of wisdom, it's the beginning of compassion, and it's the beginning of serenity. And of course, it is understandably quite deeply ingrained in us that suffering is wrong and therefore someone is to blame for it. But of course, the Buddha did not leave it at the recognition of this fact, but went on. If there were no way out, I would not tell you about it. Inner suffering can be brought to an end. But the acknowledgement that there are difficult, unpleasant experiences that we have to go through in our life is essential. Therefore, I want to take a closer look at this. There are experiences that are difficult to endure. This fact of life must be acknowledged. If we turn away from it, we remain trapped in the hamster wheel of seeking happiness where it cannot be found. But as we all know, even experiences that we appreciate, that are lovely, that we wish for, don't remain. They don't remain to be enjoyed. They change sooner or later, or we might get bored and need some alternation. And some of this unsatisfactory nature of life, of experiences, I remembered when I prepared this talk. When I was young, I was very, very much fond of Winnetou, the story of the Native American that Karl May, the author, wrote many books about. I was really... That's how it was. I was extremely into it. I mean, I remember in my room, I had this life-size picture, of him. I watched all the movies, of course. I collected all the pictures. I read all the books. I went to bed with him. I woke up in the morning. He was really my hero. And then I remember one time I went shopping with my mother, and my mother met a neighbor, and she said, and I could actually buy again one of those pictures of a movie that was a kind of a present for me. And then my mother told this friend, oh, that's just a passing kind of thing, it will pass, And I remember I got so angry. And I think both the neighbor and my mother, I told them, I know there are things that pass, but this is gonna last. And I was sure. I knew things pass already then, but this was different. And that, of course, as much as I was sure that it's gonna last, as much was the suffering when I, after some years, slowly, it began to realize it faded, the interest faded. It was very painful, very painful. And actually I went through the same thing with dolls, maybe a little bit earlier in my childhood. I was totally into playing with dolls and putting clothes on and off and taking them out for walks, and I mean really. And my mother used to knit clothes for the dolls, really nice ones, and again it was the same sense, being totally in it and being sure this is gonna last. And again I remember the pain when it was slowly, getting older and becoming aware that it's not quite so interesting anymore. And I also remember I tried for some time to do as if it would be interesting enough still. Because I couldn't bear that something I'm so inspired by is fading. It was very, very strong. So, of course, acknowledging unsatisfactoriness does not mean denying the many aspects of life that bring joy. But no matter how pleasant and wonderful everything may be for us, it will pass. There is a ceasing for every arising, and for every beginning there is an end. And no matter how hard we struggle to preserve, control things, this essential rhythm of life cannot be stopped. Ajahn Chah, who was the teacher of Ajahn Sumedho, who was my first teacher that I just mentioned, he put it in this way: whatever we experience, he would say, not certain, not certain. And Suzuki Roshi reminded, when students would come and explain to him some of their experiences, he would say, not always so, not always so. Therefore, as the text says, all delightful things of the world, sweet sounds, lovely forms, all the pleasant tastes and touches and thoughts, these are all agreed to bring happiness if they are not grasped and possessed. But if you regard them merely as pleasures for your own use and satisfaction, and do not see them as passing wonders, they will bring suffering. I think we live in a culture that leaves little room for admitting this kind of dissatisfaction. Or when we meet it in our personal life, we view it as perhaps as a personal failure, or we react with closing down. I should not feel this. We pretend it does not exist. And many things in our world revolve around pleasure, and that is often called happiness. In a way, it is also a kind of alienation from what is true. We try almost everything to maintain the impression of a fulfilling and stable world. Here is the beginning of a poem by Hilde Domin. She was a German writer, and she describes our human existence with kind of quite a dramatic image. We are immersed and washed with the waters of Noah's flood. We are soaked through to the skin of our hearts. Longing for a landscape this side of the border of tears doesn't work. Longing to hold on to spring blossom, longing to be spared, does not work. She says we cannot avoid fate. Hilde Domin seems to say we can't avoid life being hard on us at times. We cannot avoid suffering. She seems to say we are destined to experience all sides of life. When she says we are soaked through the skin of our hearts, nothing, of course, would be more understandable than to avoid this threat. Nothing would be more human than the desire to be spared. But according to Hilde Domin, this wish does not work. It does not work to want to live in a country without tears. The desire to preserve eternal spring, eternal youth is of no use. All these comprehensible wishes are useless because they miss the reality of life and because they do not really help us. Now, Hilde Domin's poem is not a fatalistic or depressive view of life. Of course, one could understand it like that. It is a moving testimony of a woman who did not harden and embitter, but committed herself right up until old age to human common bond. When one reads or knows about her life. So can we reflect on ourselves, our relationships, our inner and outer walls in front of this mirror? What does it mean to inhabit a body, to smell, to feel, to see, to hear, to remember? And of course, the hopefully non-judgmental view at our human situation is not simply love, peace, and harmony. But it is also not just doom and gloom. It is an honest view at our life. And in moments when we succeed in letting this fully come to us, compassion can arise for us or for others. Otherwise, we remain trapped in accusation or depression. So there is the inevitable suffering that we cannot avoid, the arrow that hits us every now and then. We get sick, we get older, in the end we die. We experience what we do not want to experience. We experience that what we want, but it leaves us again. But besides this inevitable change we are exposed to, we usually shoot a second arrow, as if the first one wasn't painful enough already. And this second arrow is our view and our reaction to our experience, mostly with desire, holding on, or some kind of resistance. Or we could say we take the experience to be my experience. Kittisaro, he was a former monk also in the Thai forest tradition, still a Dharma teacher, describes this taking on as being my experience as follows. He says, we take possessions of the experience, we claim it for ourselves. We set up our tents, we raise a flag, we establish a club, we start a petition, and we begin a talk show. In short, we set up a target for the arrow. And of course, the target that we set up is our taking all the experiences personally. They are our personal success or failure. They belong to us. They are what we are. And consequently, of course, we then, whenever we do that, we feel hurt or offended or ashamed, insulted, or if things go well, we feel proud, exalted, triumphant. And here I would like to read a story that probably many have heard it before. It's not the first time that I read it, but I think it illustrates quite well this conceit having its root in the wrong perception of reality. It's called Mullah Nasruddin Saves the Moon. Mullah Nasruddin was walking past a well, eine Quelle, when he had the impulse to look into it. It was night, and as he looked into the deep water, he saw the moon's reflection there. I must save the moon, the mullah thought. Otherwise, it will never wane, and the fasting months of Ramadan will never come to an end. He found a rope, threw it in and called down, "Hold tight, moon, keep bright, rescue is at hand." The rope caught in a rock inside the well, and Nasruddin pulled as hard as he could. Straining back, he suddenly felt the rope give way as it became loose, and he was thrown on his back. As he lay there, gasping, he saw the moon riding on the sky above. "Glad to be of service," said Nasruddin. "Just as well I came along, wasn't it?" Not shooting, the second arrow, means not to grasp the experience either by desire or aversion, not taking it personally, not claiming it our own success or failure, seeing its interdependency, its nature. And I think this sitting, this walking, is dedicated to seeing this. And in this way, in every moment, we practice awakening. We learn to free this present moment from grasping, from not grasping the desire, not grasping the aversion, or to give up the demand, the hope, the claim that things should be in a certain way for us. So, of course, on the one hand, this is possible in each moment. On the other hand, there is a path that we cultivate and walk on that allows more likely for the mind's clarity and openness. So what we do here is not just about meditation. It is about a holistic training of the heart and mind and the embodiment, the implementation of what we have trained. Somebody once said, one cannot attain enlightenment, one can only live it. So we cherish and we cultivate a path that is, one could say, insight-friendly. And this path encompasses all aspects of our life. It encompasses our communication, part of what we practice, of course not so much or almost not at all in a silent retreat, but in our everyday life, is learning to communicate in such a way that it fosters more clarity and connectedness. And here's an example of the power of the spoken word. The son of the village elder is sick. All possible remedies have been tried, but none were able to cure him. Finally, the healer is brought in. He says a few prayers, just a few words, then turns to those present and says, "The boy will now recover." Many of those present are amazed, but one of the most critical protests, "It's ridiculous to think that with a few words you can heal someone." Whereupon the healer says to him, "What do you know about healing? You have no clue and you're a complete fool." The man gets completely upset and angry. His face turns red and he's ready to yell at the healer. In that moment, the healer calmly says, "You see, if a few words have the power to make you angry and red in the face, how could a few other words not have the power to heal?" I think we all know, that or experienced ourselves how words can either have a consoling, a healing effect on us, and we've all experienced probably moments where we experience the hurting aspect of words. So we take our whole life as a practice ground. Practicing a respectful, non-harming relationship with others is part of it. Respecting other belongings, not harming in our sexual relationships. If possible, earning one's livelihood in a way that does not harm or injure or exploit others. Bringing awareness to where we linger inwardly and what then motivates our speech and our actions. Of course, also in our daily life, not just here in a retreat, the quality of mindfulness is another aspect that we cultivate. And I'd just like to address a few aspects of this quality of mindfulness. We are all mindfully, hopefully depending on a certain situation, hopefully in traffic, driving, but of course also somebody doing a bank robbery, mindfulness is needed, might be more successful. Hopefully a surgeon has it during an operation. So whatever we want to do, mindfulness is an important element for success. Now, mindfulness, as it is understood here as part of a spiritual practice, is something more demanding. It is an alert, attentive, immediate dwelling in the present moment. It is understood as a state of mind free of desire, rejection, judgment, permeated by inner balance and serenity. It is unbiased and has no preferences. And it is always in relationship. We are in relationship with the experience because it is here, not because it promises to be pleasant or because we want to get rid of it. But of course, mindfulness alone is not enough for a beneficial, insightful, and liberating practice. It needs a whole entourage to act as a positive and transforming force. And ultimately, everything is about wisdom, liberating insight and compassion. And without this, mindfulness is without brain, we could say. It sees, but it does not understand. It sees, but it does not connect. So right mindfulness penetrates into the depths of each experience. It is not like a cork swimming away on the surface, but like a stone sinking into the depths of the water. Right mindfulness has the overview. It is compared sometimes with a person standing on a tower from which he or she has the overview of the surrounding land. Similarly, he or she can consciously perceive what is going on in the body and mind, in the hearing, in the feeling, emotions and thoughts. If appropriate, right mindfulness exercises restraint. We constantly get inputs at the 6 sense gates, like the ears, the eye, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. And they continuously pull towards pleasant forms, sounds, tastes, and fight against corresponding unpleasant sensations. for example, here on a retreat, we might become aware that we are constantly driven to look around, to see what others are doing, and often, maybe not always, but often, inevitably comparing ourselves, judging us or judging the other person. Or we become aware of other ways wanting to distract ourselves, and as a consequence being or becoming more restless in our mind or in our body. And we might then, for a certain period of time, try not to look around so much. Keep the senses a bit more restricted and see what effect it has. So there is renunciation involved here. Right mindfulness also acts as a protection. It prevents the unwholesome forces such as desire and hatred from penetrating our mind and from stealing the wholesome qualities such as generosity, compassion, and others. Right mindfulness also accentuates the qualities of each experience. Just as salt accentuates the specific taste of each meal, right mindfulness emphasizes the specific characteristic of the present experience, be it hardness or gentleness, heat or cold, pleasant or unpleasant, alertness, dullness. It sees what is with more clarity. And it recognizes the universal characteristic of the present experience, that it's in constant change, that it's interdependent arising, that it's having come due to exist due to causes and in itself being the cause for the next experience to arise. And the last one I'd like to mention here, right mindfulness enables cognitive reorientation. It is unbiased and friendly, and it allows for a fresh look at our experience or at our life. For example, what so far has been perceived as hostile can be seen with new, more compassionate eyes. Also negative thoughts like I'm a failure, I'm always so restless and excited, as well as other opinions, views and assumptions can be reinterpreted and positively changed. And I remember an example that Christina Feldman once gave, illustrating this functioning of mindfulness. She actually something that happened to her. She was in a cafe with a friend drinking coffee, and in the next room there was quite a number of women and their kids. And the kids were, of course, being kids. They were kind of playing around, running around, being a little bit noisy, and that was kind of okay. But it just got worse and worse, and they were coming and shouting and really disturbing them. And Christina said she, over time, she actually got quite some averse to that, although she was quite had quite a lot of blackout. Never mind. She was compassionate towards kids, having kids herself. So, the scenery went on, but after some time, she looked at those women there thinking, well, why don't they do something? And she realized that they would do sign language to each other and that they actually couldn't hear. And at that moment, she said, of course, she viewed the whole situation in a different light, and in a way perhaps even felt a little bit ashamed, having been so aversive and perhaps even said something to them. So that's one aspect also that together with mindfulness, clear seeing can happen. We have a new look at the situation. Niklaus Brandtjen, he's a Jesuit and Zen teacher from Switzerland. He says, those who are present are a present for the others. Present meaning Geschenk, in this case also. And of course, as we've often encouraged you to practice a kind of consistency of mindfulness, here a picture that is often used, that mindfulness is the flame of a candle. It can see what's in our mind, in our heart, what's outside. It illuminates what there is to see. And the calm, the non-flickering burning of the flame is the consistency of mindfulness. It illumines even more precise. And this, of course, again, it requires renunciation, it requires sometimes letting go. And it is unrealistic to expect peace and clarity in our mind, in our life even, while at the same time we fill our mind and our life continuously and without interruption with sense impressions. Now, when all these qualities are more frequently present, when they got stronger, the more often our perception is less colored with our ideas, our desires, aversions, our hopes and fears. More often we have moments where we can see things as they really happen. We recognize that our own consciousness, feelings and thoughts change from moment to moment. And this direct experienced insight into these natural processes dissolves ignorance. The mind is more attuned to how our life functions, that it follows its own laws and is not really in our control. And that there is not somewhere outside of this process an unchangeable core to which all this is happening. And instead of always wanting more or something else, an attitude of gratitude, of appreciation and generosity becomes more often our inner landscape. And instead of being imprisoned in resistances, unwillingness, anger, the inner climate is more often one of benevolence, of compassion, of kindness. And all these aspects, how we live our life, how we live our relationships, how we take care of the inner climate of our mind, how we view the world, ourselves, all what we experience are part of our journey. And there is no hierarchy among them. One of them isn't higher or better or more important than the other. Rather, it's a network of cultivating, deepening, strengthening, broadening all these beautiful inner qualities. And they are all influencing and strengthening each other, and thus allowing for more clarity and cheerfulness, hopefully, kindness, openness of heart and mind. So much for this quite wondrous inner path that, using Leonard Cohen's words again, shows us a wise manual for dealing with the defeats that we all experience by having found ourselves in this body and in this mind and heart. And I'd like to end with a quotation by Toni Packer. Toni Packer, she was a German-American Zen teacher that later left the Japanese Zen Buddhist tradition, and she founded her own center, Springwater Center. And she has been described as a Zen teacher minus the Zen and minus the teacher. Emphasizing the importance of meditative inquiry without practicing Buddhism, that's what she said, meaning without all the rites and rituals and titles that were part of her tradition that she had practiced in for many years before she found her own Springwater Center. So that's a quotation by her from her book, The Work of This Moment. The emergence and blossoming of understanding, love, and intelligence has nothing to do with any tradition, no matter how ancient or impressive. It has nothing to do with time. It happens on its own when a human being questions, wonders, inquires, listens, and looks silently without getting stuck in fear, pleasure, and pain. When self-concern is quiet, in abeyance, in außer Kraft gesetzt, heaven and earth are open. The mystery, the essence of all life, is not separate from the silent openness of simple listening. So let's just sit for a moment to let the many words settle down. I'll read the text again by Toni Packer. The emergence and blossoming of understanding, love, and intelligence has nothing to do with any tradition, no matter how ancient or impressive, has nothing to do with time. It happens on its own when a human being questions, wonders, inquires, listens, and looks silently without getting stuck in fear, pleasure, and pain. When self-concern is quiet, heaven and earth are open. The mystery, the essence of all life, is not separate from the silent openness of simple listening.